Hi, it's Rachel Miller from All Things I See, coming to you from my guest bedroom during this time of COVID-19. I'm recording this video to share some advice with you around leadership communications. At the moment, particularly in a time of crisis, leadership communication has never been more important. So I want to share some advice and guidance with you if you are struggling to encourage your leaders to be visible during this time. I had a conversation the other day with a client of mine and we were talking about her leaders, and she used the phrase virtual leadership, how to encourage her leaders to be virtually visible, which really resonated with me, really struck me and resonated with me. So I've been thinking about that, and I'm going to be sharing a blog post with you to give you advice and guidance. But for me, if I think about leadership communication during this time, it has never been more important. Are you struggling to help your leaders understand their role when it comes to being present and being visible at this time? This should hopefully help you. When we think about leadership communication, ordinarily, we are trying to help them be visible, to be credible, to be trusted. And a huge part of that is showing up. It's showing up in person, it's going to the front line, and it not being like a royal visit where we roll the red carpet out and we have the leader turning up. Best practice for me, good examples of effective internal communication for me are when leaders build this into the way that they work, where they regularly show up to the front line, they regularly walk the floor, they regularly make themselves accessible. If you are a global organisation or have a dispersed workforce, people working on the front line or working in shops, for example, or, retail organisations or driving trains, it can be really hard to enable your leaders to be visible and be where your people are. So some companies use technology to help them do that. And over the last few weeks in particular, I've seen lots of examples, really good examples, where leaders are doing Ask Me Anything sessions. They're using platforms like Yammer or Teams or Workplace by Facebook or Google Hangouts. All sorts of things are being used at the moment, Zoom even, where the key thing is how can you make your leaders virtually visible? How can you help them show up and be where your people are? If they can't be there in person, or if you've got everybody working from home and doing remote working, they still need to show up. So my advice is consider things like, if teams are meeting via Zoom or any of the platforms that I just mentioned, for example, how can you arrange or how can you encourage your CEO or senior leadership team to stop by, to dial into a call, for example? Now here's a key thing to be aware of. There is a difference between checking in and checking up. Particularly from a local leadership level, how can you encourage your line managers, your people managers, your senior managers to continue communicating with your people, where they're checking in, not checking up? Lots of people right now are juggling. They're juggling childcare, they're juggling priorities, they're juggling worrying, frankly, about elderly parents, for example. So how can we help our leaders show empathy? How can we help our leaders understand their role is to check in, not check up? I've heard some real horror stories. I've heard examples of people arranging calls at 8:30, just showing up online to check in with their teams, to check up on their teams to make sure that they're working. That's spectacularly unhelpful. And the key thing I think we need to think about is around outputs and outcomes, not necessarily clocking off the hours minute by minute, hour by hour, but are your people achieving what they need to achieve in the time frame that they've been set a deadline, for example? And if they're not, how can you be flexible? How can you understand and show empathy that you trust your people to do their jobs? That's really important. That's what's going to be remembered for this time. There's lots of examples in the press around how organisations are treating their people. There's been some fantastic examples, and there've been some horrendous examples as well. That's what resonates. That's what lives longer than this crazy time that we are finding ourselves in right now. Your leaders have a really, really critical role to play here. So how can they make themselves visible, accountable, empathetic, to build trust, build credibility? Think about what you ordinarily do. What are the channels that you normally have inside your organisation? How do they normally show up? continue those where you can. If you normally have town halls, for example, how could you run a virtual town hall? If it needs to be everybody at home, your leaders, for example, presenting from home, do that. The news is being shown with people at home. I saw Christian Guru Murphy the other day from Channel 4 here in the UK presenting the news from home. If they can do it, you can do it. So think about how to encourage your leaders to show up and do virtual town halls, for example. Joe Bland from the NHS blogged for me the other day about how to run a virtual town hall. Do see my website, allthingsic.com, how to run a virtual town hall, to read her advice and guidance. Lots of really good information in there to help you. So I'm going to summarise some top tips. So what we need to do is think about the channels that you ordinarily use. Can you keep any of those going? So if you have particular leadership communication channels, how can you keep those going during this time? Number 2 is you might need to tweak what you've already got. So if you have town halls, for example, you might need to make them virtual. How can you do that? So the mindset here is, how do we make our leaders accessible and virtually visible if they can't be with our people in person? Number 3 is get your leaders comfortable being uncomfortable. I write about this all the time. I talk about it a lot during my masterclasses, particularly the change communication masterclass. It doesn't have to be polished and perfect at this point in time. The most important thing is that our leaders show up. So how can you get your leaders used to not having a script? How can you get them used to just being online and doing an Ask Me Anything session for half an hour or an hour where employees ask questions and they have to answer them? My advice in that situation always is to encourage your leaders to say, it is okay not to know the answer. It is okay to commit to say, I will come back to you. And to say, you know what, that's a great question. No idea what the answer is. That is totally okay to do. So get your leaders comfortable being uncomfortable. Number 4 for me is get those lines of communication open, two-way lines of communication open. Your leaders need to be listening. It's not just about being visible and showing up, it's about actively listening. Do they know what the top 3 things are on the mind of your employees? Do they know what the rumours are? Do they know what the concerns are? It's incredibly important, because when your leaders show up and they're only talking about the top 3 things on their minds and they've no understanding of what's on the mind of your employees, then there will be a disconnect. They will seem out of touch. The levels of trust go down. That's part of our role as internal communicators, to make sure our leaders are aware and listening and aware of the rumours and knowing the anecdotal feedback, the water cooler moments, or the chat that's going on our virtual channels, for example. Really, really important. So our leaders need to be listening and actively listening, taking comments seriously. And the last point for me is around consistency. So give certainty of communication, even if you can't give certainty of content. So it might be that your leaders do a weekly email, or they do a daily vlog, or they do, who knows, a fortnightly face-to-face update, a video, for example. Whatever it is, give certainty of communication, even if you can't give certainty of content. So get that rhythm, get that cadence of your internal communication for your leaders sorted. So that's telling your employees you will expect to hear from our most senior leader, or our HR director, or commercial director, or frontline ops director, whoever the most appropriate person is for your organisation, and give a timescale. And then that person shows up. It might be that you rotate it. It might be that your organisation will hear from your most senior directors, from the team of directors, every other day. One of them will do a blog, for example. You need to give certainty of communication, even if you can't give the certainty of what will be in there, the content. I hope that's useful. Do feel free to get in touch with me if you have any other questions around visible leadership, virtual leadership, or anything internal comms related. You can email me, rachel@allthingsic.com, and do check out the website allthingsic.com/blog to find 1,300 articles on all things internal comms related. Keep going. You're doing a great job. And if you think this is useful, let me know. If you want me to record any more, let me know. It might have to be from my car, because it's going to be the only quiet place in my house for the foreseeable future. But I'm very happy to do that. Do let me know. Take care. Keep safe. Wash those hands. Look after each other. Back soon.